So we've reached number six. I seem to start everyone by saying, so we've reached, as if it comes as something of a surprise. But we're at number six.
We're at number six, yeah. Again, and you always say we've reached whatever number, and I also we were meant to do one a month, and we haven't done it. So number
Well,
six, slightly late.
in fairness, we were on schedule this month, but it was my fault. Well, it wasn't my fault, it was my wife's fault for causing
Well,
damage to the car.
I think we were going to do it. I had to pull out one week, and then you had to pull out the next week. So it's both our faults.
Yeah, exactly. Anyway, and we're joined by a little of the good stuff tonight.
Yeah, because we're recording in the evening,
And
we can
and
have a
it
whiskey.
and it seems appropriate.
It does, it does.
What's yours?
So I found this in my drinks cupboard. I never bought it, so I don't know where I got it from. So it's a Cardew Gold Reserve single malt
Oh,
Scotch
that's
whiskey.
that's that's quite nice. I'm having a 20, 20. I'm having a 12-year-old Glenfiddich,
Oh, all right, nice.
which I went to the cupboard and was trying to find some bottles, and I discovered, those little present packs. The only time you ever see them is Christmas, and they've got four little miniature bottles. So this
Mhm.
somebody must have given me it last Christmas or even before. So it's got four. There's now only two left. Um,
Mhm.
but it's got four little miniatures of various types of whiskey. There's a Glenmorangie or Glenmorangie. I'm never quite sure how you pronounce it. Glenfiddich, and I'm not quite sure what the other two are. So
Mhm.
that's the Glenfiddich.
Nice. I never knew you were a whiskey drinker.
Um, Very rarely. I don't drink huge amounts of it, but there are times that it just seems the right thing to drink, and yeah, tonight's one of those. But it has to be a decent whiskey. None of
Oh
your
yeah, yeah, yeah.
none of your blended rubbish.
Well, 'cause I was looking through, and then I have two miniatures in mine as well. One of them I must have got at a wedding, and then I've got another one that's a really fancy whiskey that I got up at Talisker, but it's very expensive. I've only got a little bottle of it, but I'm keeping that for a special occasion because I think it'll be the most expensive whiskey I ever drink. So uh, maybe on the 100th episode, or when we reach 1 million subscribers, I'll crack open that whiskey.
One of the things I find about retirement and disappointment about retirement is that my whiskey supply is running out and I'm going to have to actually buy some because for probably about 10, 15 years at Christmas and New Year, major suppliers, people who you were spending lots of money with during the course of the year, as a way of saying thank you, would give you a bottle of malt whiskey because I'm Scottish. People always
Yeah.
give you whiskey. So I probably drank less than a bottle a year, but got two or three bottles every Christmas. So I had a nice supply. But
Mhm.
that's now what, 7 years since I kind of retired. So my whiskey supply is dangerously low. So I'll need to do something about that.
You can always ask for Christmas presents from the kids.
Well,
Put
there
that
you
out.
go. That might be an idea.
Because I usually get a bottle or two at Christmas, and that keeps me going for the year. But yeah, mine's is running low as well. So I'll maybe my sister actually messaged asking what I wanted for Christmas. So I'll say to her a nice bottle of whiskey.
Nice bottle of whiskey. So now to the meat of the issue, because you've discovered I think you've now jettisoned Jack and Simon or Jack and Simon or Simon and whoever the other.
Simon and yeah, even I can't remember.
Yes. And you've kind of now jettisoned them and realized that they are in the past. And you've got something new in the go.
Something, yeah, it was slightly new. Something I'd started on. So I'd given up on Jack and Simon a wee while ago, and then started this other thing. And then when we started doing the podcast, I started going through the Jack and Simon stuff and thought I'll try and write that again. Uh, but yeah, as we discussed in the last episode, it just wasn't getting anywhere. So I picked up on so there's this. I've got this vague sort of fantasy world that I've been building in my head, and look, I've actually got quite a lot written, different scenes. None of them completed, of course, just different parts of different scenes. Um, and it's yeah, so I've talked about it before on I think when we did the episode on the Fever Dream,
Yep.
I talked about it, and it's just again, it's nothing's pinned down, but this sort of city state, and it's located on a loch, so it's very much influenced by Scottish geography. And I was up in Skye, to be the end of September, and I went for a swim at this beach on Skye, and I was on my own, and it was very isolated and windswept. And sort of just doing a writing exercise in my brain, when I was at the beach, and I was thinking of how would you describe it, and what words would you use? So I was kind of just coming up with a description of this of the landscape. And the book the idea I've had has always been set against a loch, so I was kind of doing it with that in mind. And then a couple of weeks later, I was reading a book. I can't remember what it's called. It's the second book in the Last Kingdom series, and that's set in so it's the Viking invasions of Anglo-Saxon England, and the main character, they stake some Vikings into the ground. They pin them into the ground. I think it's at the River Severn. So
Yep.
it's sort of the tidal flats and leave them there to drown. So the two things together, I thought, what I could write a story about someone being pinned to the ground because that was a very brief thing in the novel. They didn't really go into much detail,
They had
but
lovely ways of killing people in those days.
yeah, well, I thought that, and then I just thought that the setting this description that I've been working on, what happens if it's a setting for someone being executed in that way? They've been pinned down and drowned, and it's that slow death. So I have this character that I've been working on as well. That you've read some stuff before, Elsa.
Yep.
I'll probably going to change the
I
name.
liked that.
Do you like the name?
No, I liked what you sent. I liked the way it seemed to be going.
Yeah.
I think I said at the time. But yeah, I thought that had a lot of possibility.
Yeah, so I've got a good three or four different scenes with her. She's the main character, but without giving too much, well, I'm going to give it away because it's she gets killed. But she's the
Which
main
is fine
character.
because it'll never get finished anyway, so you may as
I know, I know, I know. We're just giving away we're completely ruining. Even if I do write and publish a book now, I've spoiled it completely for everybody. But I always envisage it as like a two-part or maybe a three-part story. As all good fantasy is, it's all a trilogy, isn't it? But she's the main character in the first part of the first book. She gets killed, and that then spurs on the plot for the next novel. But I never knew how she got killed, and then I thought this is how she gets killed. So that's what I've been writing is her death scene, where she's led to this beach, and it's sort of the process of her being tied down, uh, or I think it opens with her. She's already again. I'm trying to work out the logistics of how you would,
oh,
yeah, because I feel like staking. That's not the right word to use. Staking someone into the ground.
pinning them.
Yeah, I'll need to.
You're using metal or wooden stakes,
Well,
so
that's the idea is that she's almost
yeah,
she's like there's a big
sort of.
wooden stake and she's tied to it. But I need to work out the logistics of how that happens. But she's restrained and there's stuff going on behind her.
Yeah.
But then on top of that, there's a couple of elements in it that the beach she's at is a beach that she visited a lot in her childhood. So then is it going to weave through the final bit is revealing stuff about her childhood and some of the stuff I've written. I wrote it and it's at the opening of the thing I sent you, but I think I'm going to move it sort of kind of weave it through the narrative instead. But it's these memories of going fishing with her father in the same area, and then the person that is killing her is also her lover, and it's her lover and his father, and there's a lot going on,
Neat
which
twist.
yeah.
But is this going to be a kind of sort of fantasy world? Because if it is a fantasy world, you can bring it back to life whenever you like because somebody's cast I don't know, a spell or
So
whatever.
it's a fantasy world, but it'd be a low fantasy. I don't know how much fantasy have you read a lot of fantasy?
Not a huge amount. I mean, I suppose, I've read some of Terry Pratchett's Discworld novels. Um, I read, I read The Hobbit, and then I found Lord of the Rings just too long. I really enjoyed The Hobbit, but I
Hmm.
say what I started. I think I probably read it the wrong way around. But yeah, so yeah, fantasy's not a big thing for me. Um, but yeah, I can see it offers huge potential because you don't really have to be um, constrained by the normal laws of physics
Well,
or
that's
death.
this is the big thing is like writing it. I was really enjoying it. I'm like, this is. I wasn't enjoying writing about Jack and Simon. It was just, oh, here I go again. I'm reading over stuff and that. Remember that little thing that we published on Substack and sort of give a window into this. I've got all this stuff that I've written and I'm lost in it. I don't know what I'm doing. So with this, I'm enjoying it a lot more. But with the fantasy, so you get different sort of levels of fantasy. So you can have high fantasy like Lord of the Rings, whereas or the Wheel of Time's another really good example. And there's all these sort of like magics and wizards, or Wheel of Time. They tap into this thing called the One Source, which is a sort of elemental power. But what I envisage is much more low fantasy, whereas which would be more kind of uh, sort of Game of Thrones, Song of Ice and Fire. But even less than that, I don't really see much magic in it. It's just I want to create a world where I can just do what I want in it and incorporate a lot of what I've learned in history and read in history, but
Uh-huh.
not be constrained by actual historical facts.
Yeah,
So there's a lot of
because there's too much checking if you go down that way.
exactly, yeah. I mean, I read a lot of so basically historical. It's more a historical fiction, but without the being tied to the actual real world. I want to create a world, but it's influenced a lot by I've read a lot about the Roman Republic, the French Revolution, um, sort of like yeah, those are probably the two most influential. Maybe a bit of the Reformation. So sort of these times of political upheaval. So the Roman Republic, most I've read about is when it was like Caesar and it was going into the empire. So that sort of destabilized period between the Republic and the Empire. The French Revolution is obviously a huge a time of great change and political upheaval. Same with the Reformation. So
What
bringing these sort of things into it, but not
what
being
you
sorry.
what you're really good at, from what I've read of yours in the last year or so, what you're really good at is description, and detailed description, and what you're describing there in terms of the world you want to create and the society you want to create, your ability to describe in detail this world that you are creating, I, I think would be really interesting.
Yeah, I spend a lot of time on description, and that's probably yeah. I would say that's what I enjoy the most. Well, not enjoy the most, but that's where I do feel I'm stronger at. Where I feel like I let myself down a lot is dialogue. I find dialogue quite difficult to write. I just feel like it's so that's a lot of time where I'll come undone is I'll have this opening idea and image in my head, which is the beach and the women, Elsa being executed, and I'll start it off and I'll write it and I'll be really happy with that. I'll maybe get about 2,000 words in, but then it's bringing in the dialogue and then progressing from that initial description.
And where do we go from here?
Where do we go? Yeah. Um, but I also think that's just you just have to plug away at it and you keep going and again it's what I find sometimes is um, sequencing it. So where does everything come in? So I'll end up having all these ideas and I'll put them all in first, and then that's what I'm saying. Like I have the idea of the getting the backstory with the father and Elsa thinking about her father and being on this beach before, and I've got that at the very start. But I'm thinking actually that'd be much more impactful later on in the
Yep.
scene, or woven through it, so you're getting glimpses of it throughout the scene. But it is just about working on it and um, I suppose developing those skills to write dialogue.
It's quite interesting because we'll come to it later, but Simon Houlton, who is the author of the book we're going to be talking about later on, The Night Swimmer, it was quite interesting talking to him when he was saying that he started writing this book in about 2017, but he had a number of things on the go at the same time, and eventually The Night Swimmer kind of became, you know, obviously it took the lead from all the other projects, and that's the one he went on to develop. Um, but that thing about detail, my father, his one of the things I find difficult when I try to read some of his work is the level of description. And I can remember some stuff he wrote when I was in my teens, and the flowery description seemed over the top. And as you know, description and that huge detail description is something I struggle with. So I'll have an idea that I should be able to flesh out into two, three, 4,000 words, but I get to 1,500 because what I've done is I've done the journalist thing and I've reported the facts. Um, but I haven't described the colour of the courtroom or the texture of the leather bound seating the prisoners were sitting on. So I need to work on description an awful lot more.
That's now you mention that you sent me something you wrote, and I think that was exactly my feedback was that I liked it, but there was I said there was like a lack of sensory
Yes,
description. So you don't. It was yeah. It was, I think I used the word journalistic. It is. It was very. This is this. The
yeah,
plot goes forward, but you didn't really feel immersed in the world. But
yes,
I was thinking there's a balance because you could go too far with it. So the Wheel of Time series. So there's meant to be 12 books, so 12 for the Wheel of Time. Um, I only ever read about eight of them. I kept plugging away and I was never really enjoying them properly. I don't know why I read eight because they're all about 1,000 pages. Um, but so it was Robert Jordan was the author, and there was some great things in those books, especially the backstory and the whole world was amazing. But his style of writing was so descriptive and so slow. I think, geez, just get I think I gave up eventually. There was these characters and they were in a village, and they were in this village for about a book and a half, and I was like, I can't give up. Um,
and then he put his right foot in front of his left.
yeah, and it was like descriptions of what everybody's wearing, and it's but he did have this amazing world system. As I say, there's this one source, and they've got these the male and the female side of it, and they can both tap into their side of it, but together it's stronger.
Mhm.
But the male side's been tainted, and it drives you. Any man that touches it goes insane. Uh, and it was a really yeah. There was a lot of. I think the world was really cool, but but then he died, and another author, Brendan Sanderson, finished the novels. And according to everybody that I've spoke to that's read them, says that as soon as he took over, they
It
got a lot
improves.
better. Yeah, yeah. Because he had all his notes. I think there was 14 books in the end, so there was a 14-hour day or 14-hour clock. But that's certainly the example I can think of over description, where it kills the pace of the plot.
Yeah,
So I try to balance it out. But I do feel, yeah, I do enjoy writing description. I think it is probably one of the things I'm better at.
good. But yeah, I think you're quite right to ditch Jack and Simon because I've kind of ditched the whole. Yeah, again, I died these two characters from who'd hung around since the 1990s, and I think we talked about it before. But those characters were developed out of people we knew at a particular time, and we've kind of moved significantly on from there. So they're probably not relevant to us anymore, or certainly not as relevant as they were. And actually, the novel that I had written, which featured uh, the characters we called Frank and John, I was rereading that recently, wondering whether I should fillet it and stick it up in our Substack. And actually, I don't like it because I think, again, it's of its time. I was in my 30s when I wrote it. Um, you so yeah, I suspect that's I'll never destroy it. I'll never dump it. I'll always keep it there. But I think that's
Because you did, it was a complete novel. It was
it was yeah,
complete.
it was 105, 110,000 words, something like that. Um, but yeah, that's in the past. Moving
Yeah,
on to bigger and better things.
that's it. And you're saying that the people, but it's you. Like what you're writing is you're putting so much of yourself in it. And again, it's like 10 years ago, I was writing the Jack and Simon thing nearly, and that's yeah, I don't have that same. outlook on life. I'm not having those same experiences. And it's yeah. I mean, Stephen King. I read a book from Stephen King called On Writing, and he's saying if you have an idea, you need to write it. You
Yeah.
know, if you can't, I can't remember the time frame he said, but it was probably too short a time frame in my opinion. But he was like, once you have an idea, you have to write it within like 2 months or something like that, or you'll lose the momentum. But
And I can understand that, yes.
yeah,
I mean, I recently, I, my work as a local newspaper reporter 40 years ago, there was a quite a big story that well, it wasn't a big story that I was involved in. I kind of drove the story. It was all mine. Um, and it was based around a young person's hostel. Um, in Dumfries, where I lived and worked at the time. And one of the things that brought it back to my mind again recently is that one of the key players died recently, and it just made me sort of think back to stuff that went on. So this was a kind of a hostel, a kind of halfway house for teenagers who had been kicked out of their homes in Glasgow or had run away or whatever. And it was set up by what at that time was a fairly new thing, a housing association. And some of the people who worked there landed jobs because of who they knew. And fairly soon after it opened, I had quite close connections with the local branch of the National Children's Homes. And the stories started coming out about abuse and only physical abuse. And I don't mean this in a remotely flippant way, but we didn't have sexual abuse in the 1980s. We probably had it, but we certainly didn't talk about it. And I think
which
we're
should be interesting. I'm actually reading a book. Um, I got it, and it's about King Cora in
mm,
Belfast, and that's pretty much the exact same thing. But that was like a sexual abuse in a young man's or in a hostel for adolescent boys.
I mean, I think if you went back and spoke to some of the young people who lived in what was called Hope Place, you might find that there was also, nowadays, with what we know, I would find it surprising if there hadn't been sexual abuse as well, but certainly it was never mentioned. And
Mhm.
I ran stories over about a year and a half, um, which ultimately got the place closed down. Um, and we faced an awful lot of, there was an awful lot of pressure put on my editor, my managing director, to pull me off or stop me writing about this place. And it was just an amazing. I mean, I was doing things like meeting the kids who, well, I say kids, you 17, 18-year olds, so some 16-year olds. So I was meeting the young people who lived in this hostel at the bandstand in the local park at sort of 9 o'clock at night because they couldn't afford to be seen to be coming into our office or to be meeting me in daylight. And as I say, this guy who was the local coordinator for National Children's Homes, he kind of put things in. So I started writing about that in a kind of fictionalized, or using that as the basis of the story, but in a kind of fictionalized sense. And that then led me to think about the James Herriot books. And obviously his books were all about the life of a vet, but each chapter was kind of a different story. And I started thinking about my life as a local newspaper reporter and just all the stuff that you deal with. The big stories about this place like Hope Place, but then so much of the lovely stories about meeting people. I met this wonderful old couple. I think they were celebrating something like their 60th or their 70th wedding anniversary. And obviously Dumfries is not that far from Gretna, and Gretna's got the anvil that people get married over. But in those days, I don't know, it may be changed now, but certainly in their day, it was a symbolic marriage. It wasn't a legal marriage. So they ran off. So you've got to remember this would be the late 1980s, and they'd been married for 60 years. So we're talking about the late 20s, early 30s. So they ran off as 16-year-olds and went to Gretna and got married over the anvil. And then I think they'd obviously gone off and consummated the relationship because she told the story of when they got back home, they were basically rushed round to the minister to be married properly. So I assumed that was because they'd done the deed.
Ah, right.
But the people, so I wonder whether there's some mileage in doing a sort of Harriet style life of a local newspaper.
So you'd have the main characters. There's one main character, and it's just all the different events, obviously.
If you look at the Harriet stories, so you've got James Harriet, who's the kind of junior partner of the vet's business. You've got his senior partner and senior partner's brother, the housekeeper. So you've got five or six key characters. And then in terms of the clients they deal with, there are some recurring characters. And I can think of some counsellors and things who would be recurring characters. And yeah, you would, going back, I'm sure I've told you this story before, but going back to the miners' strike in 1984 to 85, and I wrote a particular story. It involved a local council who wanted to give a cash donation to the soup kitchen that was feeding the striking miners. So I did the story. We'd held the paper back to print late, so we had this council story in. And I got into the office. So that was a Thursday night. Paper, I rushed back to the office after the meeting, battered out the story. Paper was printed. Came in on the Friday morning, and the paper was out. And about 10 past nine, I got a phone call from the leader of the Labour group telling me that they thought I'd written an appallingly biased story and it was very slanted towards the other side. And so I had a conversation. We ended it agreeing to differ. And 10 minutes later, the leader of the Conservative group of the council phoned me up to tell me what an appalling piece of journalism it was and how biased it was to the other side. And my editor said, well, you probably got that about right then. So,
Bit
yeah,
like the BBC at the moment.
well, not with the BBC at the moment, yeah. Um, so, yeah, there's some mileage in there as well.
I think that about it. I think that about a lot of experience I've had. The characters you meet and the places you work. There's just so much mileage in the day to day, isn't there? Uh,
I think one of the problems, though, is that the things that we do on a day-to-day basis, we tend not to see them as being particularly special or unusual because it's stuff that happens to us. But in many cases, they are.
but then I also think that's so. Probably being a journalist, you probably came up with a lot more unusual things than I have done being a chef. But I think there's a lot of stories that are it's more like the relatable stories. So you talk, affairs at work, I always find like the petty rivalries in work fascinating. And I think they're always like they'd be a really good source of stories. How people get so caught up in little power struggles at work.
Oh,
Um,
and that happens everywhere.
yeah, like I mean, I work at food markets and things like that. I just like there's always there's a guy there's just especially in street food. So that's what I work in now is street food. There's a lot of people that basically just they can't get jobs anywhere else. They get a gazebo, they get some cooking equipment, and they say they're a street food vendor and they make food. So you get a lot of interesting characters. You also get a lot of people that are really passionate about food in it as well. But you'll be at a market for sometimes weeks on end. You form this little community there because everybody gets to know each other. But just all the things that are going on in it and the relationships that are forming and the people, the backbiting and bitching about things and um
The thing I always loved about starting a new job or getting involved with a new club or organization or something is that you go into this group of people and everything seems happy, everything seems on an even keel, and everybody seems to get on with each other. And then after you've been there 2 or 3 weeks, the cliques suddenly
yeah.
emerge and they're sort of fighting for you to sort of come and join their side of the argument. Yeah,
Well,
it's
that's I'm trying
good
to
as
I'm trying to
bloody.
describe it. without incriminating or without incriminating myself more than anyone else. Um, but yeah, there's certain people that are in the street food scene in Edinburgh that are, um, shall we say, a little bit like a bit pompous, a bit uh, I kind of think highly of themselves, but are oblivious to other people's perceptions of them. Uh,
Talking talking of being pompous, you
it's a good
almost
segue, yeah.
you almost accused me of being pompous.
Surely that's not the first person to do that.
Oh, ho, ho. Um, over something I published in my Substack recently, which was
Yeah,
kind of I didn't think it was pompous. It was
I
it's
wouldn't say it was. I wouldn't say it was too. I read it. I suppose pompous would be the right word. You were quite. It was an old man rant, wasn't it? You would
It,
admit
wa-
that.
it was a kind of old man rant, and it sort of it came out of two things. So I was on X, um, and this woman had been posting an X, and she made this sort of very what I thought was pertinent statement. Just one lifetime ago in the UK, our grandfathers could buy a home, buy a car, have 3 to 4 children, wives could stay at home, take annual vacations, and then retire all in one middle class salary. We had same day GP appointments, ambulances within minutes, dentists, good education, decent public transport, clean rivers and beaches. So again, what the fuck happened? And it just kind of
Margaret Thatcher.
well, it it resonated with me. And I think after reading that, I then took the dog out for a walk. And one of the things I see more and more often are parents who are kind of pushing a pram or a buggy with kind of their newborn child. And rather than talking to it or interacting with it, they've got their noise cancelling headphones on, listening to some boring podcast. Um, and I just kind of wonder, come to myself. And I think back to my own upbringing. Um, and what she describes about the wife staying at home, it was very much the life I led. Um, you know, it was, I think my father now would be described as displaying levels of toxic masculinity because his wife would, as I say here, after getting married, my mother never worked again. In fact, in 1986, just after we got married, Kay, who had just graduated and was waiting to start her first job, went to find out whether after the wedding she was still entitled to the benefit she'd been receiving before it. Categorically, she was told no. Apparently, as a married woman, her husband was expected to support her. Can you imagine someone telling you that today? Going back to the issue of my mother, she never worked a day after her wedding. Her role was well and clearly defined. Produce the children, keep the house in order, and cook the meals. The fact that my father allowed that to happen would, according to modern psychologists, have him banged to rights on accusations of toxic masculinity. But we're not talking about something that happened in some far-off land. This was Britain within our lifetime. And when I think back to the street I was brought up in, and think about my wider family, aunts, friends, and my parents, etc. All those families were just like ours. The man went out to work and the woman stayed at home. Um, and even just thinking about the evolution of that, um, you got to a point where women started having, once the children got a bit older, women would have a part-time job. But there weren't career couples in the way that there are today. But equally, you have to be a career couple these days. Otherwise, you can't afford a mortgage and you can't afford to buy a house. So the society has funneled us in that direction. So yes, if anybody wants to read that, then you can go to stuartbailey.substack.com and have a read. Um, but yeah, it was an old man rant sparked off by a couple of things, but it just also highlighted how far our society has come, and I'm not entirely sure it's all for the best.
Yeah, I mean that's it. So I always think there's unintended negative consequences to things that are overall good. So like female liberation. I think we'd all agree is a good thing. Women having the choice whether they want to stay at home or go out to work is a good thing. But that doesn't mean that the there aren't certain negative consequences that come from that, which is so things like like obesity levels,
Mm.
because people there's nobody at home to make homemade dinners, so everybody's relying on more and more on ultra processed foods.
Yep.
Is that a contributing factor to obesity levels? Probably is. Uh, but I would say that the overwhelming positives of women being allowed to choose what to do with their lives outweigh the kind of negatives.
I
Um,
agree, but I also wonder whether they are being allowed to do what they want because of this thing, because of the house price inflation. My first house that I bought was a decent sized two-bedroom semi-detached, and it cost me £23,000, which seems amazing, which was less, my mortgage was, that was less than twice my salary. Now people are having to get multiples of five times and above. So, I can remember when after we got married and we bought the next house up, we could still fund it on my salary. I think we paid 41,000 for it, and I was on about 17, 18, something like that. So, again, it was less than three times my salary for the mortgage. And that's the choice that young women don't have these days. Even if they wanted to stay at home, that option doesn't exist because you can't live a decent lifestyle unless you've got two decent salaries coming in. So,
yeah, that's true.
yes, yes, it's good, but that's largely what's fueled house price inflation because we're not building enough houses, so there's a shortage of houses, so supply and demand's kicked in, and that's driven prices up. So yeah, it's as everything within society, it's complicated. It's complicated. And it's not all down to Thatcher.
I know you didn't bite for that. I was waiting for you. I wanted you to bite because it's pretty much all down to her. But no, no, I was just trying to see your reaction there. But you did well to swerve it.
Just-
So anyway, we move on to the night swimmer.
Yeah, can I make an apology before we go any further?
Yes.
Because in a couple of times we've referenced the night swimmer a couple of
Um,
times before, and I have referred to it as the midnight swimmer. And I think the reason I did that is because the book we were reviewing the first time we spoke about this was The Midnight Library. So it's a book by Simon J Houlton, and it is The Night Swimmer, not The Midnight Swimmer. Although he does,
I think I've referred to it as a midnight swimmer as well.
yeah. So we
Yeah.
shall go from there. Um, it's a book. I mean, Simon sent it to us, um, which is great because obviously somebody in the business is paying attention to our podcast. So Simon sent it for review, and I started reading it, and I just loved it. And for a couple of specific reasons, I think one, it's set in Hastings. Um, the other is the main character, Bill, just reminds me on so many levels of your father, my late brother. Um, there's just such similarities. Um, you know, Bill's a Luddite. He handwrites his manuscripts. I think your dad possibly had moved on to a typewriter.
No, because I can remember about being a teenager and we'd have me and my brother would have to type out his handwritten manuscripts, and we'd spit like and we'd be there, and it'd be like the summer holidays, and he'd give us these fucking plays to type out, and I said, "Oh, great!" And we'd sit there and be like, "What does that even?" We're trying to decipher these
Decipher the
terribly written
handwriting.
his handwriting was terrible, and that was how we spent our not all of our summer holidays, but a significant portion of it trying to decipher these manuscripts and type them up because he was also a journalist, and all his plays were always set in newspapers. Um,
Write
uh,
about what you know, they say.
he certainly did. He didn't. He did. Yeah, so we're all set in newspapers, and it was always um, sort of like there was always like a modern, PR person coming in to reform or change the newspaper, and the heroes kind of
which he
battling
didn't
against
like.
them. No, of course not. No, no, no.
There's also a bit where they describe in the book, Simon describes Bill's flat, and there's he's goes into somebody talking out as we were about description. He goes into some detail about this set of pans that
Yeah,
Bill has, which
yeah.
are sort of black cast iron ones. And that's, as I say, there's just so many levels, including, I have to say, the alcohol consumption. Um, but there's so many levels where the character of Bill reminds me of my brother. It's quite scary, really.
Well, you say he's a Luddite. I remember visiting him once when I was an adult by this point, but he'd stopped using the refrigerator for some reason. He just, that was the level of his rejection of the modern world, that he was just, for some reason, he decided he didn't want to store food in the fridge, which was which was bizarre. And
And I
he
think I
had a
think
pan. So yeah, there you go.
I was good. I think he at one stage he or probably throughout his life actually he didn't really call it the radio. I think he still called it the wireless. Um,
Um, I don't think he ever called it the wireless when I was there, but I imagine. But he also had a really strange relationship with TV because he hated TV. He'd always moan about TV, but he was obsessed with going on TV. He wanted to
oh,
go.
yes,
Yeah,
yes.
so he got rid of his TV and listened to the radio all the time. But
He did a Scottish television sports quiz because he loved his sports quizzes. He did a Scottish TV, an STV sports quiz way back in the 80s. And then it was probably most notably shortly before he died, he was on the chase.
he got yeah, so yeah, he went out on the. He got caught. I think it was the beast that caught him.
Yes.
But he went out. He'd made a big deal about being religious when he was talking to Bradley, and then he went out on a question about Christianity, which I,
Uh,
which I thought was quite funny.
so yeah, Bill, so yeah, two levels in which I think the book is fantastic. Based on Hastings, his description of Hastings, his description of the pubs, his description of his walk along the seafront to go to the Dole office are just marvelous. Um, and I just so I was kind of hooked in very, very early.
Yeah, I mean, I made a few notes on description. I'll just pull them up. But the seafront one again, because I've been to Hastings a few times, so I had an idea of of what he was writing about. But the beachfront in particular, I've always been to Hastings. It's always been quite nice weather, and Bill's always walking in the rain and the wind. So, it was an interesting to see a different side of Hastings. But yeah, that sort of long walk along the beach, I thought it was all these descriptions I found very vivid. But vivid, so they give you a very vivid image in your mind, but they're all quite bleak, kind of drab, colorless as well at the same time. Apart from which we're going to talk about, apart from his descriptions of the old town.
Yes, which and I think we before we started recording, we were talking about the fact that he almost kind of sees the old town as being his comfort blanket.
Yeah, absolutely. There's a
that's
warmth
really,
to his description in the old town of pubs. There's a warmth to them, and it's sort of enclosed spaces like small streets, and it does feel, it tells you kind of the character. That is his safety. That's his world. That's where he wants to be.
yeah.
And every time he leaves that, the world is just a much grayer, darker place.
I did. I've obviously, as you know, recorded an interview with Simon that we'll publish fully in Substack, and I think we've got a couple of clips coming up of some of what he was telling me. But one of the things I found quite interesting was his relationship with other people. He's an odd character, and there's a part where he's sitting in the Anchor having a drink while the barman is observing him. And basically, you've got a bit of story where Bill is observing the barman, and the narrative is Bill's description of the barman. And then you've got the barman looking over at Bill and describing how he sees Bill. And it's quite interesting because I think a number of times there are people who look at him and they clearly see something very different
Yeah, yeah. I mean, it's an interesting dynamic in the book that all the like we were talking about status earlier in Superior, but all the characters kind of see themselves. So you get because you get the nat internal dialogue from different characters at different
Yeah,
times. Mo Most of it's told from Bill's perspective, but you do get Preston the barman, and every all the characters kind of see themselves as better than the other characters. But it's a sort of a loop, isn't it? They all kind of see themselves as, for some reason, they're better than the other ones.
I mean,
Um,
the one I love is the job centre clerk or the dole office clerk or whatever she is, who obviously is quite powerful because she decides whether Bill gets any money next week or not.
I'm sure
But
she's described as a little Hitler at one point.
I think he does,
Yeah.
yes. Um, but she's described in rather unflattering terms. Um, but again, she holds the power over him, but he doesn't like that. He sees himself as better than her. She's got the mustard stain on her cardigan, which he kind of looks down on. And then when she tries to kind of sort of pull rank almost when he puts down in the sheet or the form, that he describes himself as a writer. Whereas I think the last job he'd had was as a supermarket shelf stacker or something. And, she points out that actually he's got no qualifications to be a writer.
But there's a couple of points there. One of them, the disagreement he has with his supervisor and why he leaves his job is that he doesn't rate the Beatles, which was
Yep.
uh, I thought was humorous, but also one of the things I liked least about Bill, as a Beatles fan. But the couple of things about the being a writer. So it's like like I feel like that's in the book. I mean, it's not particularly prominent in the book. Maybe more from where we're approaching it doing this podcast. It's like, well, what is a writer? Are we, do you have to be published? Do you have to be making money from it to be a writer, or are we writers, even though we're putting out 1,000 words, sending 1,000 words to each other that are never completed? It's something I don't think there's a definite answer for,
I
but
don't,
it's
I don't think there is.
no, I just think I was sort of with the podcast. It's like, can we actually consider ourselves writers? Because
Well,
I told someone I was doing a podcast called The Frustrated Authors, and she says, "Oh, yeah, an author," and I'm like, "Well, no, that's that's the
that's
point that
that's the whole
we're."
point.
But she just assumed we were authors. Um, but then the other thing, again, bringing it back to you talking about how Bill reminds you of my dad. I remember having conversations with him at one point when he was unemployed, and he was writing plays, and he pretty much had the exact same conversation with his dole officer or whatever you call them about, I'm a writer. The way I'm going to get out of this is by writing. And to be fair, it's my dad. He was a journalist, so he had made his living writing, but he wasn't a journalist at that point, and I don't think his dole person really cared that he had aspirations to write plays, and just wanted to get him a job like Bill doing something menial.
I mean, talking of great scenes, and again, because I know the area and I know where Simon's writing about, but when he gets the job, scaring birds off the waste at the,
Yeah,
at the local tip.
yeah, that was one of my favorite parts of the book. There was a level of absurdity to it. It was just it
Oh,
was it was hilarious.
completely. Even
Yeah.
even down to the trying to kit him out with the uniform and the required equipment that he needed.
Well, there was something about the shoes, and it was like, what size shoes have you in? And I've got one. Oh, there's one right, and then oh no, there's another right, and
Here's a left one, yes.
yeah,
It was all none. But again, the description of the guy at the tip who he had to go and meet, who was going to induct him into what he did. The, I mean, I talked to Simon about the characterization, and he said that he, over a period of that time, he developed these characters, but didn't have a story to slot them into. So it took him some time to actually come up with cows. In fact, he started writing it in 2017, and he had. Let's just listen to what a little bit of what he said to me because it kind of fits in with what we've been talking about, how we struggle to get things done. So this is what Simon said about writing the night swimmer, not the midnight swimmer, the night swimmer.
I figured you were going to ask this question, so I was trying to remember. I'm not entirely sure when I started writing it, but I'm going to hazard a guess of probably about 2017 because over the last, I suppose, 12 or 13 years, I've actually started writing lots of different things, like stopped or got bored or dropped something, picked up another thing. So this was something that I was writing originally along with other things at the same time. And then after a while, this was the one that sort of jumped out, and I was like, okay, I'm going to focus more attention on that one. I couldn't be certain, but I think about 2017.
So yeah, we're not the only ones who have that problem of taking quite a while for an idea to come to fruition.
I don't know if the word reassuring is the best word to use, but to know that people that have actually completed stuff or accomplished writers also have the same problems that we have. Like I've watched quite a few interviews of George R. R. Martin's, and he notoriously slow at writing. And you listen to him talk about his writing process, and it's very relatable. So it's comforting to hear that. But that's another thing about the book is that it does go into the writing process itself quite a lot, which I found, um, again, as someone that's aspiring to write, I found it quite an interesting part of the book because the character of Bill, again, and it goes sort of full circle because Bill's writing a novel, but he's also, which is also the novel that you're reading. That's kind of the way I interpret it. It's also the novel, The Night Swimmer. So it gets a bit trippy, I would describe it as. Would you think that's a good word to describe it?
Well, again, there's this wonderful quip from the end of my interview,
Oh,
Simon,
is it?
which talks about that. So just like let's hear what he had to say about how he finished it off.
For the last maybe 7 or 8% of the book. So I've almost completed it, I've just got a little bit. I just need a little push to get over the hill.
Yep.
Um, and I didn't do anything for like 3 or 4 months, but everything that I needed to do was in my head. I just have to sit down and write it. And it was just like polishing off like a little bits
Yep.
of a couple of chapters and stuff. Um, in the end, I used, do you know a pill called Ritalin?
Yes.
Yeah, yeah. So I took some Ritalin and I sat down with a prescription, by the way.
Yep.
And I sat down and I finished it all in like 4 hours. But I'm not very interested in using these sort of pills or medication. I don't like it.
Yep.
But there's a little part of me that's like, you could have got there a lot quicker if you'd have just sat down and taken the Ritalin and done the writing in the first place instead of wasting 4 months.
That quip. So, so again, if you're following Simon's path, medicate yourself. I, I had heard of Ritalin before, but I didn't actually know what it was. So I checked up, and it is a drug which treats the central nervous. It's a stimulant for the central nervous system, and it's primarily used to treat people with ADHD.
Oh,
So, but
interesting.
certainly it seemed to make him sort of focus, and he got the book finished. So I'm not sure I want to go down that road though.
No, I find a bit of whiskey or a couple of glasses of red wine or that's usually my routine. Is
I've always felt that you kind of there's a need whether you drink it or not, but when you're actually sort of trying to put some fiction together, there's kind of always a need to have a glass of whiskey at the table because or on the desk. Because if you ever look at films or TV programs where there's an author, they're inevitably drinking while they
where they're right. Need to get
well,
some cigarettes, start smoking as well.
and
Uh,
one of those little green eye shields.
but I do find like a bit of alcohol. I tend not to drink beer when I'm writing because that sort of makes you sleepy. But I do find alcohol just a little bit just sort of loosens you up and helps things flow a bit more. So
Yes,
I mean, it lowers your inhibitions in general. So it lowers your, so it turns off that part of your brain that's always doubting yourself.
Yes.
which I find a lot of the time is the part of my brain that stops me writing. If you write something and you don't think it's any good, so so I find alcohol helps in that regard. But you don't want to drink too much because then
Then
you get
you wake up in the morning and reread what you've written.
aye, it's incomprehensible.
But going back to the characters, and I think somebody else who's critiqued the Night Swimmer has said that it's very much a character study driven story. And as we said earlier, the characters are quite the landlady who clearly has designs on him. The fags in the pocket, the dressing gown, the way he describes her, you immediately get a picture in your head of what she's like. She's almost a slightly overweight lady. Um, it-
I didn't imagine her as overweight. I
oh,
thought I imagined her as quite slim, but she's ambiguous because again, I think in the first description it's that he doesn't know how old she is. He can't tell how old she is.
yes. I
Um,
can think of lots. I suppose there was a character, the housekeeper in the Tom and Jerry cartoons, who was quite a large lady who kind of had the dressing gown and the slippers. And when I first read the description of the landlady, that was kind of who I saw in my head.
all right, okay. No,
So
I for some reason I imagined her with like bright red hair, sort of like permed with it. I imagine her as sort of slightly sexy woman. Um,
that's really interesting because I saw it was, which was kind of why he always tries to avoid her.
yeah, but because I think she tries to have sex with him at one point.
Oh yes, yes.
Aye.
That's clearly her aim.
Mm.
She's clearly got her eye on Bill, but
And I like to think that they end up having some sort of relationship at the end of the novel because they maybe they meet in the pub and she buys them drinks and I mean it doesn't say it at the end, but I just like to imagine that they end up having a relationship,
but
maybe not
is
a conventional one, but something that works for them.
but isn't that the lovely thing about fiction? The, we can put the ending on it that we like. So you want Bill and what was her name? I can't remember what. Did she actually have a name? I can't remember.
Can't even remember.
Um,
Um,
but you want them to go off and almost live happily ever after, and that's fine. And we can all decide how that story ends. And I think that's one of the lovely things about fictions and storytelling, is if you do have these bits of plot that are left hanging, you can
Finish
resolve
them
it.
off yourself. Yeah, yeah.
Yes, you can resolve it the way you want to resolve it. Um, though I suppose we've got to deal with the character of Effie. And there's a couple lovely bits. They talk about, I think the first night he meets her, meets in inverted commas in the Anchor, and he orders her a gin and tonic. And they're already setting up clues to who or what Effie is, because I think the line in the story says he orders the girl's gin and tonic without ever making eye contact, which kind of suggests that did he actually buy a gin and tonic? But he clearly becomes, the relationship between the two of them, you know, grows into something quite intense very quickly. Um,
It's, when you're reading it, you're like, this is, you're thinking this is too good to be true for Bill.
yes,
And so you are thinking for the whole thing. I mean, it grows more and more. There's like, I think there's a part where he says he can't even remember. He doesn't know when he gave her a key to his flat. He must have given her it when he was drunk. And then there's another bit where he doesn't know how she got past the landlady unnoticed. And so you're suspicious from the start,
yes.
quite quickly into it. Like this is too good to be true. And then it turns out that it's far too good to be true.
True. And I love the way that whole thing's the denouement, that's a nice word. The way it all comes together at the end, or comes crashing together at the end, over the city. Because I think it happens on Christmas Day, they have the big bust up, and he's not, what he produces for Christmas dinner is not good enough, and the row starts. Again, the description, she's chucking bits of meat about, I think it's bits of pork, and she's chucking bits of meat about the flat and vegetable, and just the description of the way the slice of pork lands against the wall.
Mhm.
We go back to that thing about description. I think he does it so well.
Yeah, I mean, I think that was one of the big notes I got was how he describes like there's so many little moments in the book that are just like just little bits of detail that are like there's a stain on his wall that he observes, or like he's putting his sock, he's getting dressed and he's got a hole in his sock and he's staring at his sock for his toe through his sock for ages. But then also the big moments are really well written and like that kind of climax to it. I don't want to give away the end of the book, but it's hard not
But
to.
it's difficult. It's difficult not to.
Yeah, because I want people to go and read the book and because I out of all the books I've done, this is the one that is someone that's probably as close to us, even though
Yes.
he's written a book. He's this is his first book and it's such a good book that I don't want to ruin it. I want people to go and read it. But the climax of the book, there's a scene in it and it's you're reading it and it's very powerful. But also interesting with Bill is that he has this girlfriend
Yeah.
and it's a terrible relationship. What does that tell you? What does that tell you about Bill as a person?
We've focused a lot on description in our conversations tonight, but yeah, his description of Christmas Day and what happens on Christmas Day is very powerful. And then he arrives at his flat a couple of days later, and somehow magically his novel is complete.
There's another part of his description I really like is the how he describes the passage of time. So
Hmm.
every chapter opens with a sort of like this little description, but and I think chapter four was the one I marked out as one I really liked. Like so for chapter four, the autumn winter sun rises slowly from the horizon, casting an orange hue across the sea, which swells gently. The waves breaking on the pebble beach, just barely audible, where Bill sits at his desk. He looks out of the window contently. There's a chill in the air, but the glow in the sun gives him some comfort as he resists the urge to turn the heating on. And then it goes on to like all the time he's aware of the shadows moving across his desk, the dark shadows cast by an empty wine bottle and a coffee mug move quickly as if seeking escape from the coming day. So that's just an example of like it just I don't know just how he opens the next chapter and he's setting the time, it's into autumn now. And
Yeah.
just the way it the passage of time, but he also has the empty wine bottle and coffee mug, which gives you an insight into Bill's life.
Yep.
I just think it's yeah, beautifully done.
It is. As I say, I love it from start to finish. And the other thing which he touches on in the interview, which is also something that I think I've talked in the last episode about the American playwright I'd spoken to, a guy called Joe Blavaco, who talked about driving home from work one night, looking forward to spending time with his favourite people, who were the characters in his book. And Simon again talks about that thing about getting lost in the moment when you start writing. I think he talks about it more with his painting, but when the muse gets him, he's off and running. And I've had times, looking back to the novel that I managed to finish, I can remember times where I got on the crest of a wave, and you start and you just have to stick with it through until the end. And I think that's probably what I'm missing from anything I've tried to do more recently. So whether that means I'm not suitably invested in the subject, I don't know. But yeah, both Joe Bavaco and Simon Houlton talk about, yeah, kind of almost getting lost in the moment, um, whether that be with the writing or with the art. The other one we haven't touched on is, the title of the book is The Night Swimmer, and there are a couple of scenes where he goes swimming. He clearly he's swimming close to the pier. And again, coming back to the description, he's very precise about how Bill lays out his clothes. Obviously, he goes swimming naked, but he's very precise about how he tucks his socks into his shoes and folds his clothes out on the beach. And then the description of swimming out, the description, and I don't know because I can't swim for toffee, so I have never swum out from Hastings Beach. But talking about Bill turning to come back, seeing the lights, and wondering whether this is the time he's not going to make it. Again, just beautifully written, and just catching the moment.
I think that's it. Is like the layers that he puts through things. So it's like you've got the imagery of being out there and being with the sea and like looking back onto the town with the lights. But then you've also under that you've got the characterization of Bill about the sort of reckless nature of his life and how he goes out swimming and he goes out far and he's almost willing himself not to be able to get back in time. Which there's a few examples of that in the book. Just well, was more than a few, but that's again a real strength of the book. Is just I feel like you get so much information or you get so many things coming through in a really I'm going to use the word concise, even though it's a slightly kind of dry way to describe it. But I think I had a note of something actually, and it was like the description of the landlady. It's got a great knack for giving a reader a concise and insightful introduction to characters. Um, but that also extends out into other parts of the book. But from a point of swimming in the sea at night, I've done it before myself. So there was a point where he talks about going on getting his testes under the water, which I found very relatable. But I remember I was on a holiday in Benidorm, I think it must have been a year ago, and we went out swimming in sea at night a few times. So when I was reading those parts, I was sort of imagining my experiences when I was in Benidorm. The other thing about Bill that I find really interesting is he's obviously got a backstory, and he's cut. Even the very start of the book, it's like the isolation comes on him gradually, and that's how the book opens. And then there's a really interesting scene with Effie and it turns out that Bill's been married before, but he can't remember. It's like he's so disconnected from his self, from his memories. And I found that just a really, really interesting part of the book because you never get a resolution to it. You never find out exactly what Bill's backstory was. You just get these little hints at it, but he's such a broken individual that he just can't he's all these relationships from his past they've just
Disintegrated.
disintegrated, withered away. Like where his friends are now just people in pictures that he looks at, and he's obviously had a normal life.
Because I made exactly that note. Bill had clearly been a social person, um, but people who once meant something to him aren't in his life anymore.
Mhm.
And as you say, later on, we pick that bit up about you having been married and having had a normal life. But yeah, he's a very broken individual
And
who is.
but he clearly still craves that because his interactions with his reflection, which are
uh
one of the, and then he talks to his plant. So he clearly
The yucca. We haven't mentioned, amazingly, we haven't mentioned the yucca.
no, which is one of the most interesting characters I've ever read.
But quite central to Bill's existence
Yeah,
because that's in the absence of Effie, and he keeps skirting around the landlady. The yucca really is his only point of contact. The only conversation he gets is with the yucca.
yeah. There's again, I can't find it through my notes, but there's some really funny bits with the yucca. And he's trying to talk to it and he's not getting anything back from it.
Not surprising. But yeah,
It's funny, but also tragic at the same time.
yes. But yeah, as I say, a marvelous book. It's not a long book, which is great because you can get into it and you can get through it in a sitting. Um, and I just love it. And some interesting stuff because there's a again without giving away anything about the ending, there's an interesting scene where Bill has an interaction with some police officers,
Mhm.
and I thought the way these police officers dealt with him because they immediately slap the cuffs on him and they take him away. And I don't think they'd do that. I thought they might have sort of what Bill was telling them. They might have sort of checked out first, but no, I checked up with one of my friends who's a copper, and he said no, in those circumstances, that's exactly what we'd do. So I mentioned this to Simon, who said, "Yeah," as you'll hear in the full interview, he said, "Yeah, I have some experience in that area." So. Interesting. And I think also interestingly, Simon reckons that there's about 20% of him in the character of Bill. So
That was going to be my question: was how much of Bill is in Simon, which is yeah, I think every character is going to be part of you. We've talked about this in the past when I talked about Jack and Simon, and Jack is one part of me, and Simon's probably
yeah.
the more neurotic part, but just amplified and then you draw in other people.
And likewise with the Frank and John characters that Bill and I developed, and I think I said before, we decided at one stage that we'd distilled all the parts of ourselves that we liked into Frank and all the parts of ourselves that we didn't like into John to create these sort of complementary characters. So yeah, it's all good stuff. But yeah, a great read, and I will stick information about where people could buy it and how they can buy it in the show notes. But it's thoroughly recommended.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, yeah. I've recommended it to a lot of my friends as well.
A couple of other things just to have a little think about before we round off. So this is episode 6. Episode 5 has been our most um, listened to slash watched to date. So I can't remember when we talked about this a couple of months ago, but looking at kind of what makes a good podcast. So the fact that we're over 500 downloads in an episode, that puts us in the top 10% of podcasts in the UK.
That's yeah.
And in
It's,
my own
it's a
chat,
nice thing to know.
and in my own channel, my In Focus podcast channel, I've had a few that have hit four figures, which puts me in the top 5%. So quite amazing. But I don't look at this. There's 6.5 million podcasts on Spotify.
I was going to say, so we're in the top 10%,
Yes,
500. It tells you how few people listen to some podcasts,
exactly.
or how few listeners a lot of podcasts get. But
Get.
it's I think we should say that we really appreciate everybody that's listening to it and
Oh,
downloading it. It's
absolutely.
really grateful for the support.
Yes. We love you all, each and every one of
We
you.
won't forget you when we're massive stars.
70% of podcasts are listened to on smartphones, which you
Yeah,
can
that's what I listen to. Yeah.
reflects exactly where I am. 59% of listeners are in the 18 to 44 age group, so I'm slightly too old to listen to podcasts. Um, but what do you think the top podcast in the UK is?
I'm gonna say I always thought it was Joe Rogan. Is that not all like everywhere?
Very close. He's second. I was amazed to find out that the top podcast in the UK is one I listen to every week. The rest is entertainment.
Is it okay? I mean, I listened to the rest is history. I've
Right.
listened, yeah, I've listened to a bit of the rest of politics, but yeah, the rest is history. I would say that's probably the main podcast that I listen to.
So the top five. At number 5, Parenting Hell with Rob Beckett and Josh Widdicombe. At
Uh,
number 4, The Diary of a CEO with Stephen Bartlett. I
I've
don't
seen
ken
clip,
Stephen
I've seen
Bartlett.
clips of that. Yeah,
At number 3, The Rest is Politics with Alistair Campbell and Rory Stewart, which I used to really love, but post general election, I felt the balance, they both became quite tribal, so I kind of went off it. Two is the Joe Rogan Experience, and one's the rest is entertainment with Richard Osman and a Guardian journalist whose name I've forgotten. And one last thing just to touch on, which I'd be interested to hear your views on, because you were while I loved it, because I reckon that anybody who'd ever been a teenage boy was going to love the In-Betweeners. But you kind of were a teenage boy, or just past being teenage when the In-Betweeners came out, 2010. So yeah, you were past.
Well, I can remember. No, I remember. I think the first season came out. Or the first must be 2007. So I would have been. Yeah, I was
Just it's kind of just
18, 19. Probably. I remember watching the finale of the second season
yep.
in my university halls in my bedroom with everybody. Like we all got together to watch it on my computer, and when Will shits himself in the exam. Just we were all just in hysterics watching it. Um,
But they've just announced they're going to, well, they're planning to make a third film. What's your opinion on bringing back the In-Betweeners?
mm, eh, I mean, I do love them, but
Why?
there's something I don't know about when there's been such a big gap, and it was the characters were it was all about them being teenagers, and
Yep.
fair enough, like the films worked because it was like the sort of things you would do after being a teenager. It's been such a huge gap. Do you really want to see? I think there's something depressing about seeing
That part and that part of, oh yeah,
how
that
much they've
part of
aged, how much the actors will have aged, how much,
yep.
and it also brings back how much you've aged. The example, like Gavin and Stacey when they did the final one last Christmas. And I remember watching it, and it was really good and it was funny, and but there was a part of me that was really depressed afterwards because they all came out again when I was a young man, like going out,
Yep.
and there was a scene where they go to a nightclub and they're all too old for it, and I was like, that's exactly the stage of life I'm at, and I have a feeling in between us will probably leave me with a similar sort of.
My fear is that those four characters kind of got thrown together at school because there was kind of no other friendship group. They weren't natural friends. They couldn't find friends anywhere else, so ended up kind of thrown together. And that worked. That created some great comedy. I think the first film worked because that's what you do. You kind of end of school and you go off on your first holiday together. And so those four go off. Again, there's some great comedy in it. The second film, I think you're starting to get a bit tenuous. You know, would they really travel to Australia on holiday? I'm not sure, but it still hangs together, and there's some great. You're talking about Will shitting himself in the last episode of the second series. There's the great one where what's his name?
Neil.
Neil shits
Yeah.
himself coming down the waters.
Wait, he's standing at the top, and then that follows well
Yeah.
down. Um,
So, so great comedy there. I just wonder, because they are now going to be in their 30s, they're going to be married, they're going to have children. One of the things I've always thought, and I always felt, please don't make another film, is because I don't know how you pull those four characters together after school, after university, and obviously two of them didn't go to university. They're going to have nothing in common. There's nothing to bind them together as friends in adulthood.
mhm.
And Jay and Will are probably at opposite ends of the country because they'll have graduated and gone to jobs where, so, yes, Neil and Jay will still be in the town where they all grew up. So I just worry that the storyline is going to have to be so beyond the realms of possibility that it's just not going to work. But I hope I'm wrong.
That could happen, but there could be again. They could come up with a plausible reason that they all have to meet up for, I don't know, a graduation, a reunion, or something like a
Yes.
school reunion. That would be a kind of easy one, but I don't know. I think it's such a great TV show. I'm sure they'll work their way.
There are just, it's a bit like Faulty Towers. There are just so many bits, and you think, oh, my favorite bit was, and then you think, oh no, no, actually, my favorite episode was, and yeah, there's just some
But then
crisp
with Faulty Towers, that was just what it was. What 12 episodes, and that
12
was it.
yes,
Whereas the other, like, 'cause again, like David, well, Ricky Gervais did a David Brent film, which was rubbish.
yeah,
Well, it was okay, but it was nothing compared to The Office. So
yeah,
sometimes it's better just to leave things alone.
yep.
But yeah, we'll see. Wait, do you know when it's going to come out?
I don't. I mean, I think they've just announced that they're going to do it, so I don't even know whether it's written or whatever. But so I would have thought late next year at the earliest. But yeah, we just have to wait and see. But I hope it's good because you kind of wouldn't want anything to spoil the legacy.
Yeah, that's always the risk, isn't it, if you bring something back? But I'm quietly confident it'll be worth a watch.
Excellent. And that really just leaves us to remind people to look at our socials. Substack is thefrustratedauthors.substack.com. And you can also now find us on YouTube because you can see us as well as hear us. And that doesn't seem to have put people off.
Yeah. Well, I was quite surprised when you put it up on YouTube because I was like, oh God, I wasn't expecting it.
And for our next episode, what about doing a review of the frustrated authors so far?
It's very meta, isn't it? A review of a review.
Well, we could do it as our Christmas special. We
Yep.
can we can have tinsel and a roaring fire in the background, and we can be roasting
We're going to shoot that together.
and drinking mulled wine.
Well, yeah, that could be quite good fun. Yeah, I mean, so we could go back and
And I think it would be interesting to sort of look at how we've developed and how we've changed. And then we can talk about our plans for 2026. 2026, bloody hell.
I know. Yeah, that sounds good. I mean, if we do a Christmas one,
We can have a listen and find our favorite bits, and yeah, we can take it from there.
yeah, yeah, that sounds good to me. Saved me having to read another book, so
Well, you can bloody well write one before we get around to that.
that's never going to happen. Um,
It's quite
maybe.
interesting. It's quite interesting. You're talking about Bill, the character in Night Swimmer, having issues with the job centre woman, and your dad having issues with the job centre woman about being a writer, and writing will get me out of my current problems. That's exactly what happened to Sylvester Stallone. I mean, famously, Sylvester Stallone was, virtually down and out, and wrote Rocky, the original Rocky, in a matter of a couple of weeks, certainly a relatively short period of time, and it went on to be the blockbuster that it was. Because sadly, just thinking of Rocky, we probably remember the ridiculous Rockies. My favourite's Rocky 3 with Clubber Lang.
Yeah, that's
My
one.
prediction for this fight is pain. And then the following one with the Russian. So we tend to remember Rocky as that, but actually the original Rocky was a bloody good film, and I think was Oscar nominated.
I think it might won the Oscars. I think it might. I'm sure it won it, but it's a lot grittier than the later ones.
Yeah, because it really did tell the gritty story of this loser's ascent to greatness. And I
We'll
think
see you for the Christmas one.
I was going to burst into songs. I can't remember what song it was I sang at the end of last one.
But yeah,
But
yeah, you
and
can
you
answer
and you
me.
said, "Are you going to do that at everyone?" And I said, "No." So it's probably just as well I don't,
No,
because
that was more you said, and until next time.
until the next time,
Yeah.
you got that again.
There you go. Your beautiful voice. Yeah, but yeah, until the next time.